Hi, it's Kate from the Kiwi Kids Bookstore, and we are talking middle fiction today with Auckland author Kate Richards, Kate S. Richards, as she's called on her book titles. So, Kate, would you like to tell me a little bit about how you got started writing for children and what makes you passionate about this category?
Kia ora, everybody. Hi. I started writing for children when I wrote my first book, Train Surfer, and it just seemed like a natural fit for the story. And I felt like I started to find my author voice in writing children's fiction. And it also tied in with my job as a school librarian. Although today I'm talking in my personal capacity and not for the school, but working with children and recommending children's books, reading a lot of children's books, it just felt like a natural fit for me. And once I'd written Train Surfer, the next book flowed from that, and then the third one after that as well. So I wrote the whole trilogy, and then after that I thought maybe I'll try young adult. And so my latest book is a young adult book, Call Me Madeline, but the trilogy is mostly middle grade fiction. And that's a genre. Would you call it a genre? I'm not sure. It's an age group that I really like writing for. Yeah,
Excellent. Yeah, me too. It's very much my thing. Tell us a bit about Jabu and his friends. And it's a sort of cross-cultural story. It brings in a lot of real life situations and a desperation that some people will have felt. So what did you enjoy about writing the series, and what do you hear back about it?
It was quite difficult to write in some ways, because it brought up a lot of feelings of guilt and regret about living in South Africa during the apartheid era. But in another way, it was quite cathartic to write. And I wanted it to be a story that really kind of reconciled people. And I'd seen a lot of that reconciliation happening in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission during the dismantling of apartheid. And so I wanted that kind of message of hope and forgiveness and intercultural friendships to come across. And one of the things I love about middle grade stories is you can tackle difficult topics and big issues, but there's always hope, and you can always end with hope and positivity. And whereas an adult book might have a more serious or negative ending, with children need hope, and so I ended Train Surfer with a hopeful tone.
It's very hopeful. Yeah,
thanks. And I had surprisingly positive feedback. It was my first real book, my first book sitting in a shoebox in the garage somewhere, so I won't count that, but my first real book. And I was really thrilled with the feedback, and I think probably the best out of all of the books I've written. So I was hoping that I'd grow in my writing ability, but it seems like Train Surfer is an old favorite, and maybe will always be some people's favorite.
It feels very feels very real, very relatable. Even for me, growing up with what we saw in South Africa, it's in New Zealand and South Africa's always had such a strong connection, of course, with rugby, and so many South Africans have emigrated here. So it brings in that great sense of it is a culture that we have some familiarity with as New Zealanders, and it highlights the diversity within our own culture now of other people from other country coming to live here and taking on board the Kiwiness or not. And and I know the third book in the series comes to New Zealand, and so that there's a very direct link in how your storyline works.
Yes, after I'd written the first two, I felt, okay, I've written about South Africa, now I want to write about New Zealand, because I had fallen in love with New Zealand. And we'd been skiing up on Ruapehu, and I felt so grateful to the Maori that we are allowed to ski there, and that they gifted it. And it's such an interesting land, the geology, all the stories, and I really felt inspired. So that's why I brought my characters, Jabu and Kyle, came over to New Zealand and met Nico and Pania and had a fresh adventure. And then I felt it was time to end that series. I sort of felt like Jabu was 19 now, or 17, or I forget now, and I needed to finish his character arc and end that trilogy and leave it there.
So do you feel that means the Jabu and Friends series is probably for older middle grade, because he's already kind of a young teen, I think, in the first book, and then obviously he's getting older through the series?
I feel like the first two could comfortably be called middle grade. So Train Surfer, he starts off, he's 12 years old and he's a little orphan boy, and kids can definitely relate to that. And in Saving Candy, sort of 12 up could comfortably read it. There have been some 10-year-olds who read it, maybe found some parts a little bit scary, but then those same kids are reading Harry Potter, so some kids are tougher than you give them. So
much depends on the child too, doesn't it? Because they all, even though we give people guidelines on the ages, it doesn't necessarily mean that is exactly the age group that's going to read it. So yeah.
But then Nico, I probably would think that starts to go more into the young adult section. But being a mum, I'm a bit conservative about wanting kids not to read anything that's too disturbing or scary for them.
Yeah, fair enough. So why do you think it's important for Kiwi kids to read books by New Zealanders, or also bring in your South African culture and see how that fits in the New Zealand scheme of things?
I just think it's great for children to read about characters that they can relate to. We grew up reading about Buckingham Palace and Paddington Station and Avonlea, and you sort of had a feeling like that's the only place that amazing adventures can happen. And looking our own home cultures, and so immigrant kids who got immigrant New Zealand authors writing about them may be able to identify with that. They might be able to identify with a sort of merged identity that an immigrant had. And then Kiwi kids who are writing about homes that they grew up in and environments that they can recognize. It gives you a real connection to the character and to the story. And I think once you have that, you're hooked into the story, and then you're generating lifelong readers. And writers too. I think being a librarian and seeing children loving New Zealand books gives them the confidence to think, well, I could write a book.
That's a great point. That's a really good point.
You don't have to live in London or New York. I can write a book too, and I can become a published author. So
that's a really good point, to inspire others to write. Do you find that being with Jabu being a boy, that you have more male readers? Is that sort of, and I think, is it hard for young male readers to find books that they engage with and identify with as a librarian? Do you see that?
I just don't want to get into any stereotypes, but I have found a lot of boys enjoy humor and exciting adventure stories and things like that. Girls don't seem as worried about reading about a male protagonist, whereas the other way around, sometimes boys aren't that keen to read a female protagonist, but that's just kind of generalizing. But I did get a lovely email from a librarian in New Zealand saying she'd got her young intermediate boys really hooked on Train Surfer, and they loved all the surfing scenes and the action scenes. And she said, please write another. So that
and do you think there will be more middle grade fiction in your future?
Yes, I've got a manuscript that I've just finished, and it's middle grade fiction, and I'm delving into fantasy. So my first 4 books are quite serious and contemporary, and I thought, it's been a really rough time lately with the pandemic and everything, so I thought I'd have fun escaping into writing fantasy, and readers probably need fantasy in their lives.
Yeah.
And there's some lovely fantasy books on your website, Kate, your Lily and the Unicorn, and Donna Blaber's lovely books with fantasy elements, and James Russell's Dragon Defenders.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's our naughty dog.
That's all right.
And so that's written, and I'm not sure what I'll do with it next. I might try and enter it into a manuscript competition. We'll see how we go with that.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, well, all the best with that, and I'm looking forward to seeing it should you get it to publication stage, so that'll be fantastic. Now, and thank you so much today for talking about middle fiction and the whole New Zealand, South Africa cross-cultural thing. I think is a really interesting element to add into the store. It's really important for us to have an array of books. So thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you for everything you do promoting New Zealand authors and your wonderful online bookstore. We are all really grateful for your hard mahi, and it's been lovely chatting to you today.
That's great. Okay, thank you, Kate. Really nice. Okay, bye.